Have you been trying to book any flights, maybe for holiday or work for the coming months? Well, if you have, you would have noticed that the airline ticket prices seems to be going up substantially right now. And what is actually causing this, and is there anything that you can do about it? Well, in this episode I will show you the surprising reasons for this sudden price inflation, and it is much more complicated than you might think, so stay tuned. So, a lot of financial analysts around the world are, and have been for some time, bracing for a looming financial recession. Now, normally, those types of negative financial forecasts would have the airline industry bracing for hard times, and that's because commercial aviation, together with leisure and hospitality industries, are always hit first, whenever the global economy turns downwards. What then normally happens whenever aviation is some sort of a crisis is that the prices of airline tickets starts to go down. But that's not what we're seeing right now, and at least in the case of most airlines, airline prices are instead going right up. Now, some smaller airlines are facing some real economic difficulties right now. Two in Europe even declared bankruptcy during the last few weeks. And on top of that, there are other more special cases like Southwest Airlines in the US, for example, which is financially healthy but is suffering from the financial consequences of its week-long meltdown around Christmas. But most airlines are actually reporting improving economics and also crucially robust bookings for the coming summer. Many airlines have even published higher than expected revenues for the last quarter in 2022, both in the United States and in Europe. And this is of course great news for the industry, but maybe not for your wallets. Now, we don't really know if that recession experts are talking about is actually coming, or how bad it will be if it comes, but like I said before, in previous years, even subtle rumors of a recession made everyone in the aviation industry always brace for the worst, but clearly that is not the case right now. Not only are we not seeing the airlines duck for cover, we are even seeing some airlines going ahead with ambitious expansion plans for the near future, and that's truly rare for this type of economic outlook. As a brilliant example of this, in February this year we saw Air India make an insanely huge order for nearly 500 aircraft from both Boeing and Airbus. Now, this is the biggest commercial aircraft order ever, if we count it as one single order of course, since it's obviously involving both of the aircraft manufacturers. But then again, the previous biggest order, which was placed by American Airlines back in 2011, also involved both manufacturers, so this is definitely one for the record books. Either way, Air India isn't alone in placing large orders. In the United States, United also announced an order back in December for 100 Boeing 787s plus 100 more options, along with some more orders for the Boeing 737 MAX 10.
You ready to build us some airplanes?
Now, a three-digit order for wide-body aircraft is very unusual, and it says a lot about the kind of expectations that United have for the future of long-haul travel going forward. Other indicators that also show how this industry is doing well right now includes that airlines continue to expand their pilot hiring processes, which is something that I've actually talked about in previous videos. I just came back from Pilot Expo in Berlin, which was awesome by the way. It was so nice to see so many of you there, but it was many years since I saw so many airlines recruiting cadets. Even Emirates were there on a recruitment drive, and that is a very positive sign. On top of that, we also have another great indicator, and that's airport slot restrictions. From the end of March this year, the use it or lose it 80-20% slot rule is making a comeback to airports both in Britain and also in some other countries. What this rule basically means, in short, is that for an airline to operate regularly into an airport, it needs to secure a slot pair, which is a landing and a takeoff time in that particular airport. Now, depending on the airport, type of day, type of gate, and how much time that the aircraft will spend on the ground, some of these slots are really desirable, and therefore they can be quite expensive and in really high demand. Because of this demand, there is normally a rule saying that an airline needs to operate at least 80% of the allocated slot it has bought on any given airport. If the airline doesn't use them for whatever reason, these extra slots will go to other airlines who are waiting in line to purchase them and to start operating from that airport. This is a rule that generally works really well, but during the pandemic, with travel restrictions everywhere, the use it or lose it part of the rule didn't make much sense anymore. It even led to some airlines having to make so-called ghost flights, flying empty aircraft into certain airports simply to satisfy that rule to avoid losing their future slots. Now, fortunately, common sense eventually prevailed and this 80 to 20% rule was temporarily waived. But some airlines, particularly those with robust economy, wanted to see the return of this rule much earlier, especially for short and medium-haul flights, because that could force less economically stable competitors to lose those slots and give these stronger airlines a chance to snap up market share relatively easy. It didn't happen as early as these players wanted, but now the rule is coming back into force again. The return of this rule shows that aviation is truly back, ready to operate at high capacities again, likely in both short and long haul, which is, again, great news. So this all seems to be good news, but it really doesn't explain why the ticket prices are running rampant, and it certainly doesn't explain why several airlines and industry insiders are talking about how the prices will likely become even higher during the summer that's coming up. So if the prices on tickets are going sky high right now, wouldn't it be great to find some way to find them cheaper? Well, it turns out that today's sponsor, NordVPN, can actually save you money when you're booking tickets to fly to your next destination. With NordVPN, you can change your virtual location to anywhere in the world with a single click, which means that you can access exclusive deals and discounts that might not be available in your own country or the place that you're visiting. I use NordVPN to find good deals on flights, hotels and even for car rentals, and I also use them for things like accessing geo-blocked websites. So if you want to save some money on your travels and stay safe and private online, then check out nordvpn.com/mentor now right now. As a special offer for you guys, my viewers, you can get an exclusive 2-year deal, 1 month absolutely free, plus a bonus secret gift as part of NordVPN's birthday celebrations. Oh, and if you're wondering if NordVPN can make your luggage appear faster on the luggage carousel, then no, they can't do that. But they can definitely make your online experience both smoother and safer. So give it a try and see for yourself by clicking on the link in the description below. Thank you, NordVPN. Now let's continue. Back in 2020, when the pandemic reared its ugly head, many expected that the aviation industry would start contracting massively and likely that it would continue to do so for a long time. Some industry experts thought that even after travel restarted, demand for travel would drop and that more airline mergers would follow, causing a fall in overall available flights, which would eventually increase prices. Well, that didn't happen, at least not the consolidation part, but the prices did still start to rise. As it turned out, demand for flying bounced back as quickly as travel restrictions would allow it to, and the airlines then tried their best to return to their capacity, which they had back in 2019. Now obviously, that was easier said than done, especially for long-haul flights, as restrictions in some destinations persisted for longer than others and were very hard to predict. Now, even though most restrictions have been lifted, curiously for 2023 in particular, the expectation is that the number of flights between a lot of city pairs will still continue to go down. And this is really the first reason why your tickets might become more expensive. So why is this happening then? Why are we seeing less flights even when the demand is going up? Well, the first reason is that everyone in the industry is a bit more careful this year than they were last year, simply because they don't want a repeat of what happened in 2022. You might remember that a lot of aviation headlines in the middle of 2022 were about airport congestion problems and huge delays with thousands of passengers missing their flights because they couldn't get through security in time, for example. Well, as I explained in my videos back then, these congestion delays largely had to do with airports that became overwhelmed and simply weren't ready for the sudden increase in demand. The management of these airports had listened to advice from airlines and experts in the industry who had told them that they could expect way less demand than what they actually got, and that caused them to basically buckle under the pressure. This year, however, the airports report being much better prepared. Well, at least most of them are. Some of them, including Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, which suffered quite badly in 2022, still report having difficulties to recruit and vet enough staff. And they report that they might not be fully ready until the end of June of this year, so expect some more problems there. So this is one reason why the airlines are being more conservative with the number of flights that they're planning to operate for the coming high demand period. They just don't want a repeat of the chaos that we saw last year, because a bad customer experience will always ultimately land back on them. But airport limitations is far from the only reason for the lower flight supply. A lot of airlines also suffered problems last year, in part because they were running their operations too thin, meaning that they didn't have enough reserve crews or aircraft. And this, a possible shortage of aircraft and crews, is also a continuing story this year, which could also have an effect on your ticket prices, at least at some airlines. The problem here is that even though many airlines have aircraft on order and have been planning to hire a lot of new pilots and crew for this year, they just haven't arrived yet. On top of that, some of these airlines are also haunted by some other decisions that they took during the pandemic. There were a few airlines, like United Airlines for example, who generally avoided full aircraft retirements during the pandemic, and those airlines have now gradually been able to bring back their aircraft out of long-term storage and have therefore been able to fill the demand, which was a wise choice. But a lot of other airlines instead chose to retire entire aircraft types from their fleets, and that's a decision which is much harder to reverse. In Europe, for example, British Airways and KLM retired their 747 fleet, and in the United States, Delta and American Airlines also retired a lot of their older jet types. American Airlines retired all of its 757s and 767s, for example, and the plan that they had was to replace these aircraft with brand spanking new Boeing 787s, but that turned out to be much more problematic than they thought. Boeing suffered massive production issues with the 787 last year, and this means that American Airlines and others with significant 787 orders will likely suffer continued lack of long-haul capacity for quite some time yet. Boeing did eventually manage to restart their 787 deliveries last summer, but clearing this backlog of aircraft who all needs to be checked out before delivery will take over a year from now. On top of this, another issue here is the Boeing 777X, which was supposed to have entered service back in 2023, well, actually in 2020 originally. Now, no airline in the US had ordered this type yet, but its delayed arrival, now not expected before 2024, will impact the plans of other airlines around the world, like Emirates and Lufthansa, for example, further decreasing global capacity. Then comes the next factor that we need to take into account here. The speed with which most airlines can expand to meet the needs for this coming high demand season also has a lot to do with how good their finances were back in the start of the crisis in 2020. And that's because what happened with aircraft retirement back then, the early retirements, was also mirrored by most airlines' strategy around accepting new aircraft deliveries into their fleets. Many airlines were losing millions per day during the pandemic and had to immediately cut costs wherever they could find them. The bulk of the cost of a new aircraft is paid on delivery, and this meant that a lot of airlines chose to defer the deliveries of these new jets until later, in order to stem the cash bleed and avoid going bankrupt. But some airlines with more robust finances absolutely didn't do that, and instead actually saw that as a huge opportunity. You see, popular aircraft types like the Airbus A320 family have delivery backlogs stretching several years into the future. This means that even if an airline have the finances to expand and order massive amounts of new jets, they won't be able to get them until much later in time. This meant that the massive aircraft deferrals during the pandemic represented a huge opportunity for airlines with a lot of money in their pockets. Wizz Air in Europe is a great example of this. They chose to accelerate their deliveries instead of slowing down, meaning that they could take on delivery slots from those other airlines who had deferred their orders. That was a very smart move, as Wizz Air are now much better poised to take on the now spiking demand, while other airlines simply cannot do that, no matter how much they would like to. Higher ticket prices aren't just about the lack of aircraft though. Airlines are also having to deal with rising expenses, including the general inflation and rising interest rates. And when we talk about expenses, we also have to talk about their employees. Back in 2022, another reason for the congestion and problems at the airports had to do with strikes, both from airline and airport employees who had taken deep pay cuts during the pandemic. The strong recovery in the industry prompted a lot of these groups to rightfully demand for these cuts to be rolled back. In the case of pilots, the effect of the pandemic had caused a huge part of the baby booming generation, which is the backbone of the pilot body, to pre-retire. And on top of that, less pilots were trained during the pandemic for obvious reasons. So we are now starting to see the effect of a crushing pilot shortage. I made a video a few weeks ago about the regional airlines in the United States and why I think that they could soon look very different and even disappear by getting absorbed back into the majors. And the salary increases caused by this pilot shortage has a lot to do with this. With the pilot shortage now affecting almost the entire industry, regional pilots in the US are getting paid considerably more, which is great, but it also undermines the whole reason for keeping regional airlines as sole entities. But when they come, these type of salary increases does increase the overall cost base of the airlines, as it frankly should, but inevitably those cost increases will then be passed down to the traveling public. So this is another reason for the higher ticket prices right now. But let's now look at this at a more macro view. We all knew that 2020 was basically a lost year for the industry and that 2021 and 2022 would be all about maintaining market share for the airlines that had the finances and the resources to do so. That meant that those airlines needed to deliver frequent flights at lower prices to get people flying again during those years after the pandemic. And that's actually the reason why we've seen reasonably low prices during the last few years. But in 2023, you can expect that the airlines instead start focusing on normalizing their cost and income base. In other words, they will start to try and balance their books while still maintaining reliable operations. What this means, in some cases, is less flights and higher prices to fill the aircraft that are actually flying and increase the yield. As proof of this actually happening, in February this year, Lufthansa announced their plans to cancel 34,000 flights from its coming summer schedule. Now, that number could go further up, as it only involves Lufthansa's own flights at this point, and not any of the members of the Lufthansa group, which includes Swiss, Eurowings and other carriers that could cancel even more flights. So, are there any good news for travelers in all of this? Well, probably, because by their nature, all of these ramp-up problems are, well, ramp-up problems, so they should be temporary. The airlines has to adjust to a post-pandemic environment and also incorporate other changes like those caused by Russia's war in Ukraine, for example. In other words, these problems should ease with time as the airline industry goes through its normal cycle and its capacity grows back with more, better and more efficient aircraft. And from the supply side, Airbus and Boeing are doing what they can do to increase their monthly production to meet this demand and replenish the airline fleets. Airbus is right now planning to scale up their output to 75 single-aisle aircraft per month. And according to the Air Current, Boeing is also looking at high future production rates in order to try to keep up with Airbus. Boeing recently announced that they will start assembling 737s in a new production line in Everett, and until now, Boeing had only 3 assembly lines, all of them in their facilities in Renton. Boeing hasn't made 737s anywhere other than Renton since the late 1960s. In theory, each of the now 4 737 assembly lines should be able to produce 21 aircraft per month, so that will be 84 in total. But that's of course assuming that Boeing can run all of these 4 assembly lines at full capacity and that it can get its suppliers to keep up with such enormous demand, which is going to be a real challenge. These production plans and those for wide-body aircraft both bode really well for the future of air travel, as long as both Airbus and Boeing stay healthy. Unfortunately for your wallets though, these ambitious future plans won't change what to expect for aviation in the close coming months. For 2023, the simple prediction is that the demand for flying is going to be higher than the supply, for all of the reasons that I've just mentioned, leading to higher prices. But is there anything that you can do? Well, the simple and quite boring answer is that you are going to need to shop around. Like I said, most airlines are moving from securing market share with low prices into sorting out their economy with higher prices, but this isn't necessarily something that they're doing in step with each other. The airlines are all at different points in this path, or they might also employ quite different strategies to achieve their different goals, so you might still find hugely different prices between airlines and on different routes. Finally, I also want to mention that whilst these changes in the intermediate recovery period will hurt some people's wallets, it is a huge relief for many others who previously feared that the whole airline industry might be going straight down the drain. The misconception many people did in 2020 was to assume that what would follow after the pandemic would be similar to what happened after 9/11. It turns out though that nothing was further from the truth. The key difference was that the 9/11 attacks removed people's appetite for air travel during several years, causing the industry to really and truly shrink. But the pandemic didn't do that at all. All it did was to stop people from being able to travel. Whatever their attitude was towards travel restrictions or the pandemic itself, when people were once again allowed to travel, they did so, and they did so in huge numbers. And by the laws of supply and demand, plus the overall effect of inflation, this is really what's causing the prices to balloon upwards right now. So I guess nothing bad that doesn't also have something good with it. Now, check out this video next, or if you want to learn more about the industry, check out this playlist. Thank you to all of you who have been sending super thanks or buying merch. It really helps. And a special thank you to my awesome Patreon crew. I hope to see all of you in my next Zoom hangout. Have an absolutely fantastic day, all of you, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.